I just wandered into the post office. I don't know anything about it except the political thing was so nasty and upset people, a lot of people. And the veterans weren't treated right. I didn't know anything about it, except my three brothers were Marines. My father was in World War II. And, I didn't know anything about it. But I thought, I was not married. I had no prospects, although I'll tell you about my marriage and the prison too. But I can't really know why, except the political stuff would bother me. On TV, you'd get the news, how many killed, and it was crazy. And the college kids going nuts against the war. I remember seeing the film of the guy that threw his medals in Potomac. What the heck was his name? Politician. Stuff like that. It was, yeah, John Kerr. It was like there wasn't. It was chaotic, and I had nothing to do with politics. My life long, I had no interest in them. Today, everybody has a political life, the TV. And I was assigned to K.I. Sawyer in Michigan. That was SAC base, which they're obsolete now. And at the time, it was the assassination period. I remember I know our nurse come running into the queue and saying, the whole world's going mad. They just killed Martin Luther King, one after the other. And President Kennedy, previous years. And I didn't have any contact with Vietnam except, for the news. There wasn't anything on base. And so I asked to go there. I went on the most beautiful Pan Am plane, cream-colored and blue, commercial, that the Air Force hires. I flew into Cam Ranh because a nurse picked me up in the red clay and the heat. And what did I do? What am I doing here? It was a whole different world. For 6 months. And then, they tell you, you gotta go to Medcap. You didn't question. And that was a hooch across from the hospital. So I didn't report to orthopedics. The next 6 months was with Medcap. Colonel Jones. This was a colonel who rode around in a station wagon named Air Force Blue station wagon, smoking his cigar always. And he was a pilot in World War II. And he was known as, this is Colonel Jones' bus line, because he was in charge of vehicles, any vehicle. He made it, this fix it, whatever. And he always, when I was walking to the hospital, he would always turn the window down and, how you doing? Do you need anything? And this one day I said, yes, I need water and a sink in Metcalf. The building had, we call them Hutches. There was no water, and it was a medical place to wash your hand. A couple days later, I see the groups. They're digging like hell. Got water. No requisition slip, nothing like that. Which I have to tell you this story about a trip I was, but see, there was an R&R. I mean, the nuttiest thing in the world. All the troops had a choice of an R&R in the middle of this war and this bloodshed and everything. And you can go to Australia or you can go, I went to Hong Kong. But anyway, there was a known fact that you could get a flight here or there to benefit the pilots, to keep them up to snuff, and get the flight pay, but mainly for their experience. You don't want a pilot sitting around. They have to have so many hours. And so we would get little trips. I had a trip to go to the Philippines for a weekend. I got a phone call. Colonel Narif, one of them in the nursing female type, wanted to see me. I thought, well, you always wonder, what's she going to see me for? I don't even know her. So I go to the office, and she tells me, your trip has been canceled. You did not salute some officer's car. And I thought, this is weird. And I remember, and she was female type, and I can remember saying, well, I didn't know you were supposed to salute cars, and I don't remember. And she said, well, we have the complaint, and your trip has been canceled. And the talk led to, you were in the military and the protocol. Medical people aren't notorious, unless they're maggot lifers, that was the term we used, for ignoring that stuff. They don't care about salutes or any of this. They care about the body they're treating. And so I said, I didn't know that. I was kind of pleading my case a little bit because it was so odd. I thought, this is some kind of a test. And she says, you're wearing the uniform. I said, but my buttons are on the side. Well, she started to laugh, meaning I'm female, I don't know, do guys have buttons in the front? I don't know, but I mentioned that was my femininity. I had buttons on the side, and she laughed, and I knew this is some kind of test. So I don't get to go. Another week she called up, your trip is on. Silly stuff like that. Walter Johns, he just came in, delivered a new patient. Sorry. He had beautiful blue eyes. So I go over to him because he's like this, the knuckles. Like I knew he had pain. And he was close to where my station, my desk was. And he was new. The corpsman brought him in. So I went over to him and I said, Walter, I can give you something for your pain. And he said, no. The troops were always very reluctant for a feminine to see their body or whatever. Very, very reluctant. They were young kids. And so he said, no. I said, are you sure? Would you let me know? And he said to me, does my mother know Well, that blew my head. He's worried about his mother knowing, you know, but stiff, tough. He's got to start off with that injury. And you, like a routine day. I said, well, Walter, I'll see if a Dolly can come over and you can write her. You can write her a letter. She'll help you. And I'll never forget that. Does my mother know? And his face. It was painful. Exactly a year. Yeah. Everybody had a term called the two-digit fidget. Did you ever hear that one? Yeah. Well, they didn't like us having that. I don't know who organized this, but the shrinks over there did not want people involved with the two-digit fidget. You know, and they would. Everybody got a calendar at 100 days. Would you believe that? Let me tell you one more story about Sergeant Bloom. I loved Bloom. Bloom was the greatest guy. And I'll tell you, they were all respectful. Maybe a little intimidated when they got back together. But anyway, I decided this was Medcap. I think these kids, the best thing we could do is to give them polio, polio vaccine. And so I was not one for writing out slips and requisitions, because if you get into the bureaucracy, the red tape, maybe 5 years later I would get. So I can't recall how I maneuvered that, but I thought that's what we'll do with these kids. It's what we're going to do. The vaccine. So Bloom, the gentlest, best guy you could ever imagine, pimples and all, but he was fabulous. And anytime I needed anything, I went to Bloom. And I can remember getting ready. There was a truck, 2.5-ton truck, went to the hooch, and PAT was on the hood. I thought, wow, that was me. I add that because Bloom would drive the truck. And I said, now, Bloom, I have a problem. How are we going to get the kids to cooperate? They're little guys, and girls running around. And I said, this stuff might be nasty. Can't waste it. It's so important. He said, let me think about that. And he comes back and he says, jelly beans. We had oodles of jelly beans, chocolate in the heat. Let it go. So I said, oh, great. I said, go over and get the jelly beans. Well, he always used to call him Sarge Jelly Bean, because wherever we went, he made sure he had jelly beans, which I thought was a cute story for him, Jelly Bean. But I loved Bloom. And I told him, I said, if they are not at that school, we're going to go into every single hooch. I can't waste this stuff. It's too important. And he says, now wait a minute. Let's talk about that. We don't know who the hell is in that hooch, do we? I said, oh, God. Like, hey. And he used to run around, are you VC, to the little kids and give them the jelly bean. When they saw him, they loved him. Run around, jelly bean, Bloom. But see, he taught me how important. I was of no mind to understand the war type thing. They didn't teach us that. That's how it was with me anyway, and the other nurses. This guy was a young, handsome, too young. He was some kind of bomb loader, because we had a bomb squad there. 5 o'clock in the morning, boom, those, they had names, these planes. But he apparently was loading a bomb, and it hit his flank, and he couldn't move. So he was on my good side, where these guys were not, we had them segregated. Bad side, needing more help. The good side resting up. But the doctors, the orthopods, they had kind of ignored him. You know, he had x-rays, testing, everything. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And I would go over and check him, and he'd be like this in the bed. And I would talk to him. I said, listen, you got to move. Now, you're going to get pneumonia and die. You got to move. And he just looked at me. And I said, now, you got to sit up in bed. I mean, that was the nursing care. And I felt there's something really wrong here. Because every time he was like this. And so this one morning, maybe 3 or 4 days later, I pulled the sheet out. I'm getting ready to try to get him to sit up, with the feet out. His whole flank was the purplest I had ever seen. I said, oh my God, I threw the sheet over him. And the thing was, an injury, you'd rather have a broken leg than a tissue injury. A sprain is a tissue injury, and that hurts terribly. So I talked